keeping journals of observation and of your own experience. Because a lot of the actual research in CBPR is so informal. A lot of the work that you do and a lot of the information that you collect will be through what you see and what you experience. And this has to obviously become key because process data is so important. And they need to understand process when you start to develop interventions. You need to work with what is going on, what your senses of the community and how they're working. So the power of observation is vital throughout this work. And because it's so key, particularly in participatory, it is a good idea that you keep it very systematized. So research journals kept by the Research Academy facilitators can be a big part of this. And these journals are not things that you can use and then drop, and it's really something that you should be trying to keep going continuously and to be used throughout the research process. And when you're doing that, particularly in the early phases of work, you need to start looking at everything that's been important because you don't really know where the research process is going to go. Particularly in CBPR and in a more genuine approach to CBPR where you're looking to the community to define the agenda and you're needing to interact and work with that agenda. The more you can make sure you're aware of what is going on, the more likely it is that you'll be able to continue and to work actively in the process. So the bottom line is everything that you see could be important. But you also need to make decisions about what is important for the project. And as I said earlier in the course, you as a researcher are also an active part of this community. So you also need to make decisions about where you will participate and what will go on and what you feel comfortable with. And it's not just what is seen and heard, but your own reflections as well. So you need to make decisions about, just record how you're feeling in response to issues and how your position changes over time. Because this could be important in terms of the construction of interventions, particularly if you're taking forward interventions that look at social change. This is a difficult one because so much, particularly in health research, and observation is in many respects implicit in health research because we evaluate symptoms and look at patients, etc. But when one comes to doing field research, it's often discounted as being not valuable or too subjective. And I would argue that it's also stuff that's difficult to interpret beyond the use of checklists, symptom checklists or something like that. But I would argue that it is vital often vital information is being missed, particularly in terms of contextual understanding. So when you look at, now drawing on some of my observational research work here, when you're looking at what is data and observational research, it's everything you can observe, what you hear, but other senses are also useful, in particular in CBPR. Smell, touch, taste. I remember working in one community, and one of the key things that we came out of the field, the person came out saying, every part of me felt dirty in coming out. Every part felt grimy and grainy, and because we were working in a squatter settlement, informal settlement, and it was windy, and the wind was just picking up the sand on a continual basis. So just that sense of it, okay, this is what life in this community is about. So just being able to understand, if you're going to in any way represent or co-represent the community, you need to understand what those processes are about. Smell is around food and taste. That's just in terms of looking at food and dietary issues. So all of these are things that So it's not just what you observe and hear, which are the more obvious. It's also take a note of what you don't see, because very often stuff will be hidden from you, and what people try to hide, and particularly in CBPR, because as you're developing relationships and connections with the community, so the processes develop and change. And you need to, but in the early phases there will be stuff that is hidden. And you need to just be aware of that. Again, you are the research instrument in this data collection. And you'll be documenting the world as you see it. So subjectivity and awareness of what is shown and not shown is key. The capacity to read, understand, where necessary, interpret is important. So you're the one doing observing, you're the one writing down what you observe. So you need to be aware of what you are noticing and what you are not noticing. So it's not only what is hidden from you by the community, it's also what you are not allowing yourself to see. So it's the capacity to read and understand where necessary, to interpret. And this is even more complicated if you're working through field workers. Now, generally in CBPR, you will be at a lot of the meetings, but you might use field workers to go out. And those field workers will often be from the community members. So if you're working in other language communities, then you might work through facilitators or through other people. You need to be aware of what they're not seeing. And particularly somebody who lives in a community, many things do become invisible. Because they're so commonplace. I advocate keeping the 3 diaries, particularly while you're in training. The third one can fall away over time, but these are less formal than the notes that are kept for. Now, okay, this is somewhat different for CBPR. You're not often on. You might do a formal observational phase. So, say if you're doing the positive deviance, that is really observational research, and there you'll have a formal schedule. But when you're just operating day by day in the field, you won't necessarily have a formal schedule, but then your research diary becomes that. So you need to just be keeping, so that's often less formal and that you won't have specific categories of looking at, well, how are meals constructed, etc. Or how is hand washing done, but you do still need to, so very often the recording is done on the basis of date, will be done on the basis of with often specific interactions will be recorded. And then it'll be things that are thrown up and highlight for you. And sometimes these things that are highlighted are in response to issues that you've been looking at or responses to specific questions that you're raising. For example, and I'll talk about it within the intervention development lecture, then when we were working with the city council and developing this parent intervention, there was this notion of we would have places in which to present it. And we actually got and the same when we did it in Langa as a community. When we got down to formal presentation, we had to scramble for spaces, and some of them were a lot less than ideal. So, and sometimes it makes sense then in terms of, well, what happens in terms of why education is hard when working with in a community, why evening education classes are hard, or why getting a health education into even a fairly progressive and liberal employer like the City Council is hard, and how much harder it would then be to work within the less liberal, such as more commercial enterprises. So you're starting to look in terms of questions that you're raising as well as just general observations. These impact on the analysis varies from being directly incorporated into the data set, and we might do these at times, to developing understanding of context to being part of the analytic process. So, examples, so as I, those kinds of examples I was talking about in terms of the nature of venues, those could come directly into your analytic process in terms of how to build this process out and how to expand it. We were able to do it by taking over a room at an office where there's in the refuse collection space. Or we took over a room in a library for another program. All of these, they work to one or another degree, but they were all compromise solutions. So there's a need. We were looking at expanding this. And then, because we were looking to expand into the retail world, we just spoke to people in the retail industry and tried to look at some of their facilities, and then just walking through like a Pick and Pay or a ShopRite, it very rapidly becomes clear that there isn't really a space. Unless one moves into like the management offices where you can do this kind of work. Okay, within the 3 diaries, so what you're trying to look at all the time is answering your questions and looking broadly at the questions that you're trying to answer, looking broadly at the interventions and the solutions you're trying to find with your community for the problems that they face. So you're constantly needing to be aware of what's going on. So as I said, there are 3 diaries. The first diary is really your observations of what's going on in the field. This literally means recording everything of interest, and a lot of what I've spoken about is its first diary, including physical context, people you see, events that happen, notes and conversations, or even the impact to other senses. So, when working in Delft a lot, I haven't done community-based work there, but you very quickly get a sense of different spaces that you go into. And so, once you get into the main shopping area, there's the noise, so you can see the different sellers of food. And one of the concerns we had coming into the study around nutrition was that there was lack of adequate nutrition, and that's lack of access to fresh fruit and vegetables. And that's a kind of common sense with a lot of poor communities, is that there's a lot of lack of access. But it quickly became clear that this isn't a problem. Fruit and vegetables are in large supply in these open spaces, and they are a lot cheaper than you'll get at Pick and Pay or at many of the supermarkets. The quality is not as great, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's not as clean and well shaped as a well-worked tomato, but the food is perfectly healthy. So there are other reasons as to why people are avoiding healthy food. Maybe the Fed Cook are very good. I often bought their Fed Cook. Fed Cook is deep fried bread. Yes, it is. It's a lump of dough. It's deep fried, and then it comes out in like a large bun, and then you cut it and put a savory mince or whatever you want, jam, hamburgers, whatever you want inside it. It's kind of a staple in many of these communities. But it's not only what you see, because you will have certain things which will be cut off from. I know from moving into the Shebeens, we tended not to go in, and we asked not to come in during the really busy phases when they had a lot of customers. But you got shown around the Shebeen in many of the cases, and But the one thing we weren't shown very often were the toilets. And the toilets are uniformly bad in the shebeens and taverns and townships. And you get to see the shebeen, it's a big space, there's clean surfaces, but once I'm hearing from our field workers, late on a Saturday night, this place is so packed you can barely move inside it. And there's obviously then there's a lot of waste and spillage and people are getting drunk. So everything you've seen needs to get incorporated into data. It needs to be part of the mental picture you're creating of this community and understanding you're creating of the community. Now this is mostly used most research just to enhance memory and give insight into the context. And when you're sitting with the community and designing instruments to go and investigate or designing interventions, these would be things that you would reflect on. And bear in mind, although you're working with a community that lives there and should know the community, very often they've got their own blind spots around what is possible and available in each community. The second diary is really, and this is more in terms of looking at paper writing or development of interventions, is to record your ongoing analysis in the development of ideas. So one is really just, it's documenting what's going on. The second is really starting to produce interpretations. And it's often a more personal diary as well. This is less rigorous and not necessarily strictly done by date, because you might record something today, in 2 weeks' time have a further insight in that, so you'll then come back and scratch around on that page and develop the idea a bit further. But it's really just very often, particularly if you're involved in a lot of issues, you might see things, develop an understanding of something, but then forget about it. Or lose the intricacies of the idea. And so this diary is really important in terms of making sure that these ideas and these insights are not lost. Can include crossing out, adding side notes and personal reflections. And you can keep this even when you're not in the field. And this is one of those times when having edit the notes function on your phone is useful. So if you're sitting at a dinner party and suddenly something comes to you, you can make a quick note there on your phone and add to it. So it can also be kept in multiple places. And this diary should really run from the beginning of the project until everything is complete. The third diary, and this is really more for training researchers, but is also useful throughout. It covers your own self-insights, emotions raised in the field, and lessons learned. So what are you learning from going in? And it's one of the things with CBPR work is that you're constantly learning. So in that sense, this diary does have a value, although it might be used less as you get more experience. Almost every time you go into the field or do something or teach in something or learn or talk to people, you learn something new. This is just a way of keeping a record of it. Also just of your emotions as they're raised in the field. Because your emotions, bear in mind we work in an area where subjectivity is high. So as your subjectivity is influenced, so your interpretation and the way in which you work with the data will be influenced. And also because as you grow as a researcher and as you have these experiences, you grow and develop further as a researcher. So this kind of early period of training is very useful. Yeah, this diary can give you places for personal growth, both as a researcher and as a person, as you come into terms with some of the issues. It gives you ideas for self-improvement, gives you technical notes for future research and interviews. It allows you to look at questions or concerns that need to be reflected on in the future, and can be useful for, And also just bear in mind once, as I said, that you're not just developing yourself for no reason. You are broadly the instrument when you're doing community-based. Yes, at times you will use instrumentation as in questionnaires or schedules or whatever, but in a lot of that development and that analysis, you are the research instrument, so you need to be aware of yourself and how you are responding, and the better understanding you have of yourself, the better you're going to be able to work in the field. And it just encourages an active process of reflection, which I've always found is useful both as a human being and as a researcher. So while this uses a qualitative type philosophical approach, and maybe I'm influenced in the emphasis I give to it by my qualitative base, it's something that needs to be used in all research studies. And the additional observations can be extremely useful.